All right, good evening. Before we get started, I'd like to ask Greg Foster to come up here and lead us in invocation.
Good evening, guys. Let us pray, can we? Father, we come before you this evening and we thank you for, God, your benefit. We thank you, Lord, for your bounty. We thank you, Lord, for your many blessings. We thank you, Lord, that we know that in the times of trouble that you are our refuge, our high tower. You're, God, our strength and a place that we can run into in the times of trouble. I pray, God, that you just this night allow your blessings to fall upon this place, that upon the men and the women, God, that we set before tonight that make the decisions for this city. I pray, God, that you would grant them knowledge, wisdom, and understanding to know how to deal, God, rightly in your eyes. Pray, God, your favor continue to just be with us and lead, God, and direct all that we do. Pray, Father, your blessings upon the city and the people, God, therein. Lift up all that we do, God, and we just hold you dear to our hearts. And pray, God, your bounty again in this place. We ask tonight, God, favor in all things. In Christ's name we ask. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Milton City Council for Monday, October 18th, 2010 to order. Will City Clerk please sound the announcements and call roll.
And good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll be happy to call roll for the October 18th, 2010 regular meeting. However, I would like to remind those in attendance to please silence all cell phones at this time. Additionally, those attending the meeting who would like to provide public comment, either during the public hearings or during the call for public comment, you are required to complete a public comment card prior to speaking on the item. There is no public comment for consent agenda items or items under first presentation. Those called to speak will be taken in the order that the speaker cards were received by the City Clerk's staff prior to the beginning of tonight's meeting. All speakers will identify themselves by name, address, and organization if applicable. When you hear the bell, you have 30 seconds to complete your remarks. The City Council may allow public comment on either an agenda item or general public comment from a representative of such an organized group or association, provided, however, that such an individual shall file notarized affidavit that they have the authority to speak on behalf of said organization on a form provided by the City Clerk prior to the agenda item being called. Demonstration of any sort within this chamber is prohibited, so please refrain from any applause, cheering, booing, outbursts, or dialogue with any person speaking. Please show the same respect to the person speaking that you will expect to receive yourself. Anyone in violation will be asked to leave. As I call roll, please confirm your attendance. Mayor Joe Lockwood.
Here.
Councilmember Karen Thurman. Here. Councilmember Julie Zahner Bailey. Absent.
Just for the record, I did receive a call from Councilmember Bailey that she's just running late in traffic.
On her way. Councilmember Bill Lusk.
Here.
Councilmember Bert Hewitt.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Longoria.
Here.
Councilmember Alan Tart.
Here.
Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, will the clerk please call the next item?
Next item is approval of meeting agenda. This is agenda item number 10, 1257.
Okay, are there any other items to be considered?
No,
Staff?
sir.
Okay, any items from council? Okay, do I have a motion and a second?
Mayor, I make the motion to approve the meeting agenda. I'll second that.
Okay, I've got a motion by Councilmember Tart, second by Councilmember Longoria to approve the meeting agenda as stated. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay, the next item is public comment. Public comment is the time for citizens to share information with the mayor and city council and to provide input and opinions on any matter that is not scheduled for its own public hearing during today's meeting. There's no discussion on items on the consent agenda or first presentation from the public or from council. Each citizen who chooses to participate in public comment must complete a comment card and submit it to the city clerk. Please remember this is not a time to engage the mayor or members of the city council in conversation. When your name is called, please come forward and speak into the microphone stating your name and address for the record. You will have 5 minutes for remarks. City Clerk, do we have any general public comment?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay. Then we'll move on to the consent agenda. Will the clerk please sound the items?
Our first item is approval of the October 4th, 2010 regular council meeting minutes. Agenda item number 10, 1258. Second is approval of a task order with Street Smarts, Inc. for environmental special studies for intersection improvements for Arnold Mill Road at New Providence Road in the amount of $9,404.96. Agenda item number 10, 1259. Next is approval of a task order with Street Smarts, Inc. for environmental special studies for intersection improvements for Birmingham Highway at Providence Road in the amount of $9,404.96. Agenda item number 10, 1260. Our fourth item is approval of a Parks and Recreation event license agreement between the City of Milton and Mike Kitness for the use of a baseball field at Bell Memorial Park. Agenda item number 10, 1261. Next is approval of a Parks and Recreation event license agreement between the City of Milton and the Crabapple Community Association for the use of city property for the Crossroads at Crabapple Antique and Art Festival. Agenda item number 10, 1262. Our sixth item is approval of a temporary access agreement between Birmingham United Methodist Church and the City of Milton for the 2010 Milton Roundup. Agenda item number 10, 1263. Our next item is approval of a temporary access agreement between Kohl's and the City of Milton for the 2010 Mayor's Run. Agenda item number 10, 1264. Our eighth item is approval of a contract between City of Milton and Apin Newspapers, Inc. for Milton Roundup advertising for $1,130.90. Agenda item number 10, 1265. Our ninth item is approval of a contract modification between the City of Milton and AT&T. Agenda item number 10, 1266. Our next item is approval of a resolution adding Republic Services of Georgia to the list of approved solid waste haulers for the City of Milton. This is agenda item number 10, 1267. Our final and 11th agenda item is approval of a resolution adding G.W. Lovelace Hauling to the list of approved haulers pursuant to the Milton Solid Waste Management Ordinance. This is agenda item number 10, 1268.
Okay, do I have a motion and a second on the consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda as recommended by staff.
I'll second it.
I have a motion by Councilmember Luss, second by Councilmember Thurman. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay, we have no items under reports and presentation, first presentations or public hearings, so I'm going to move on to the zoning agenda. Will the city clerk please read the zoning rules and sound the next item?
At the second regularly scheduled meeting of the month, the mayor and city council consider a zoning agenda. These items include rezoning, petitions, modifications of zoning, use permits, and associated concurrent variances. In addition to ordinances, resolutions, and text amendments, the petitions will be heard in the sequence listed on the posted agenda. I would like to acquaint you with some of the rules and procedures for this meeting. The applicant and all those speaking in support of an application will be allowed a total of 10 minutes to present the petition. The applicant may choose to save some of the time for rebuttal following the presentation by the opposition. Since the burden of proof is upon the applicant will be allowed to make closing remarks, provided time remains with the allotted time. The city clerk staff will be keeping track of time and will inform you periodically of the remaining time for your presentation. Those called to speak will be taken in the order that the speaker cards were received by the city clerk staff prior to the beginning of tonight's meeting. All speakers will identify themselves by name, address, and organization, if applicable, before beginning their presentation. The Planning Commission heard the rezoning agenda items, and recommendations have been forwarded to the mayor and city council for consideration and disposition. In addition, the applicant shall not submit material to the council during the meeting unless requested to do so. All material that you wish to be reviewed by the council in consideration of your application should be submitted to the staff of the Department of Community Development. to be included in the normal distribution of packages to the council. When an opponent of a rezoning action has made within 2 years immediately preceding the filing of the rezoning action being opposed, campaign contributions aggregating $250 or more to a local government official of the local government, which will consider the application, it shall be the duty of the opponent to file a disclosure with the governing authority of the respective local government at least 5 days prior to the Planning Commission meeting. A violation of relevant state statute constitutes a misdemeanor. Therefore, if you have contributed $250 or more to a council member and you have not filed a disclosure prior to the Planning Commission meeting, the city attorney strongly suggests that you have someone else speak for your point of view. Our first zoning item is ZN 1003 VC 1002.
Excuse me, Ms. Gordon?
Yes.
It appears that the representation for this item has not been able to get through traffic itself. If you would like, we potentially could flip-flop these two items, since they're both zoning items under the same zoning agenda.
If that's okay with council, I'm certainly willing to do that. They're okay, Ken?
It is, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, what do we need to do procedure-wise, Ken?
Well, you can do it without exception, but just to perfect the record, you might want to make a motion
Okay.
to hear item 10-1269 first in place before the item that was just read.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, I have a motion by Councilmember Longoria, second by Councilmember Lusk. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, if clerk would please call the
Our next agenda item, public hearing for possible rescission and reconsideration of previous council denial of zoning case RZ 1001 pursuant to order of remand. This is agenda item number 10-1269. Ms. Lynn Tully.
Ken, do we need to go ahead and
Should go ahead and let Lynn go ahead and announce it, then I'll chime in.
All right, we are looking for really two motions here right at the beginning. If you would like to hear this item, we do need a motion for rescission for this item.
Okay,
Leave that
that's
to
what
the
I-
mayor.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. Do I have a motion for rescission on this item?
Mr. Mayor, let me offer up this before we get into the rescission. I believe the rescission itself is a zoning action. So what I would request is two things from you. If I can just go ahead and explain where I think we are procedurally. As you know, this matter comes before the council based upon an earlier zoning action of denial that has then been challenged in the courts, and pursuant to an order of the court entered on September 1st of this year, we are basically on what I would call a remand back to the city council for additional action, and that remand runs for 60 days. The court did not give direction upon what we do, except to say that after 60 days, it's going back to the court to see where we are. That 60 days will expire about at the end of this month. Based upon some recent activity of which I'm aware, and basically some additional options that potentially have come up, there may be an interest by the applicant and perhaps even the council to have a little bit of an additional time. In other words, to run this out prior to or farther than just the end of October. And if that is the case, then what needs to happen tonight is it needs to be deferred. Now, we'll have to go ahead and get an order done, which we can do in the next couple of days, but I have received assurances from the applicant that if we defer this evening, they will be happy to agree to a consent order to extend it. So what we might want to do, Mr. Mayor, this evening is, in light of this and a lot of the representations I'm making to the council, you might want to go ahead and hold the public hearing this evening. We will hold another one if we do defer it, but hold it this evening, allow the citizens that are here to speak, and allow the applicant to speak. And then at the end of it, I would request that you defer even the rescission until the next time it comes before this council which would probably be, and my request would be, if you're comfortable with this, to rescind, or not rescind it, to defer it until November 15th, which is the next council meeting when we could do this. But go ahead and have the public hearing, allow everyone to speak, and then defer till November 15th. And I think that would be consistent with at least the things and the options that I'm hearing, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, in process, should we open up the hearing as far as public comment?
Yes.
And then if we have a motion and a second to defer, we'll go after public comment.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Open the public comments first.
Okay. In that case, then, I'd like...
I just have one question, Mr. Gerard. The motion to defer to November 15th, would that include a public hearing as well? So it'd be motion to defer public hearing for the possible rescission, I mean, the whole entire thing?
Yeah, that would be fine, and I think just to perfect the record, yes, I'd want that in there because there will be another one, Councilmember Tarr.
Okay. Bill, you have a question?
To be clear in this, if we go for a deferral, are we deferring the decision to rescind?
Yes, we'll defer the whole thing. Yes, that's a great clarification. Thank you.
Okay. And before I open up to public comment, I would just like to, make a statement. And as a lot of people in here have a lot of concern about this case, and just so you know, I think the council and myself have let the citizens know we're exploring every option. I think the applicant is exploring every option. So there are some options out there, and I appreciate the fact if we're able to explore those further. So, again, I'm sorry if you have to come to this meeting and then we have to defer it to another time, but I think it's a healthy exercise, so if it does come to that. So at this point, I'll open up to public comment. Sudi?
Our first public comment comes from Mr. Pete Hendricks.
And I need to clarify public comment and approval for this or support of this application.
Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, Pete Hendricks, practice law at 6085 Lake Forest Drive in Sandy Springs. As we have gone through this, we have felt that we have explored and looked at every option that's out there with a willingness towards being exhaustive and taking a look at anything and everything that might get served up. And in conversation with staff, it would appear that there could be additional items to be looked at for additional consideration, and we're happy to do that. I think you have seen in the applicant a total and complete willingness to try and work through all issues that have been put forward. So with that, we're here to acknowledge, as Ken has indicated, that we will lend ourselves to deferral. And I think the November 15th date is what was mentioned, and we're in perfect agreement with that. The applicant is here. All our professionals are here. If you have any questions of us, we'll be delighted to be responsive. If you would like for us to come back and do another dog and pony show on presentation, we're happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comment cards in for support?
No more, sir.
Okay. How about all those in against this application?
In opposition, we first have Ms. Heidi Souter.
You have
Mr. Phil Joseph.
I'm not Heidi. I'm Phil Joseph. I live at 13800 Oakmead Trace in Milton. It may be that my comments are moot at this point. I'm eager to see what the applicant comes back with, and I would love to stand in support of another alternative. I sent a note to the council. I'd like to read that into the record. Dear Mayor and City Council, as representatives of the Bethany Bend community, we support responsible development in the City of Milton. With regard to RZ 10-01, we offer the following recommendations. rezone the parcel to C1 with the identical restrictions as the CBS parcel across the street to the north per case 2006Z-0096. These restrictions are also substantially the same as those for the adjacent parcel, which borders the applicant's parcel on the south and east per petition 85Z-0194. The excluded uses of the CBS property are as follows: freestanding food restaurants with drive-thrus, service stations, commercial amusements, billboards, adult bookstores, adult entertainment theaters, automotive repair shops, billboards/pool halls, cellular towers, check cashing businesses, freestanding liquor stores, gun clubs, lingerie entertainment shops, massage parlors, nightclubs, nude dance clubs, and pawn shops. According to the zoning code, Chapter 64, Article 1, service station means a use which provides for the sale of motor vehicle fuels and automotive accessories, and which may provide minor repair and maintenance services. A service station shall be limited to 4 or fewer bays, excluding no more than 1 attached or detached bay for washing cars. This would exclude, end quote. This would exclude the sale of motor vehicle fuels, which is a primary concern to the community. The above exclusions satisfy the community and allow many opportunities for viable business development. These would include services such as, I have a list, appliance repair shops, such as for computers or vacuum cleaners, catering limited to 1,000 square feet with no seating, financial institutions with no drive-throughs, such as banks, credit unions, or tax services, a handyman or maid service, medical clinics, laundromat or dry cleaners, personal services, such as a barbershop or nail salon, pet grooming with no overnight stay, school of business or dance, music, personal trainer, or spa. It would also include retail businesses, such as a restaurant limited to 1,000 square feet with no seating, such as Papa John's or Domino's, a florist, an antique shop, an art gallery, a bakery, a boutique, a cell phone store, consignment shop, new or used bookstore, photography studio, printing shop, or convenience like Kinko's or similar. We believe that a recommendation would allow the applicant to develop his land in ways that would be profitable to his business interests and benefit the community. I have here a map which shows the locations of the applicant's property, as well as the property that CBS has right here across the street, as well as the property right behind him, adjacent back here. And the restrictions which are currently in effect for these properties surrounding him are the ones that are agreeable to the community. And I think that it would be very logical for the city to have the same zoning and same restrictions for this parcel right in the middle as it has for the ones around it. And if the city were to do that, I think that would be very acceptable to the community as well. I have some additional documentation I'd like to just submit to the record, if I can. And thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Who's our next speaker?
Our next speaker is Ms. Heidi Souter.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Heidi Souter, 525 Sunflower Court. I guess I'd just like to say that I'm very encouraged to hear that the applicant, and I'd like to thank him personally, that he is willing to work with the city to try to bring something to our community that is hopefully acceptable to us residents. I think that the big underlying concern for me, because I'm not right up at the corner of Bethany, but I navigate that intersection often, was the statistic that that's the #2 intersection for accidents in the city of Milton. So for the same time period from 2006 to 2008, it had 73 accidents with a traffic signal. And if you want to compare that to Birmingham Highway and New Providence, which had 75 without a signal, it's pretty significant. And that was my big concern, is that it's an odd-shaped intersection. It's a difficult parcel to navigate with big trucks. And I was very worried about the safety, especially given the fact that we have a new high school coming on. All of the kids that will be either walking or driving to school, And we have 2 senior communities that are going to be built on Bethany. There's a large one that's on the Forsyth side on Bethany. And then we just rezoned, I think a couple of years ago, a senior development right along Bethany across the street from that. So you'll have seniors, you'll have students, you'll have a lot more traffic on Bethany, and that was one of my big concerns, was the traffic and safety issues. And then, again, the proximity to residential. We were hoping in a neighborhood live-work area that the transitional use would be a lot less dense or a lot less intense than a gas station. So we really do appreciate the efforts being made by the city and the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 2 comment cards. One individual would like this read. Craig Kaufman, 555 Parkbrook Trace. This is becoming a process of government by attrition. We have good and valid reasons for not wanting a gas station on an already bad corner. Why are our needs and wishes not being respected? And our last public comment in opposition is an email received by Ms. Linda Davis, 3325 Cedar Farms Court, Milton, Georgia. While I realize that your email is probably flooded after much brainstorming and thinking about how this property can best meet parking space requirements for alternative businesses, I would like to propose the following. In many places where parking is an issue for business, the business is on the 2nd floor and a parking area is built under the main business floor. Because Milton has a 2-story rule, which is great, a building with a footprint of 3,000 square feet would be able to provide enough parking under the business as well as in the areas where parking was originally going to be provided. Thus, there is ample space for a different kind of business to be put on this corner instead of a gas dispensing business. Also, in all the reports on the CVS property, the county noted that high traffic for any drive-through type business was not good at this corner because the corner was problematic. A gas dispensing business draws no less traffic than a drive-through dry cleaner, etc. Sincerely, Linda Davis. That's all the public comment in opposition. We do have a late public comment card from Lance C. Large, if the mayor and the council will entertain this.
Okay. I'm fine with that. Is the council okay with
Lance Large.
Good evening. My name is Lance Large. I live at 13770 Belterre Drive, right off Bethany Bend Road in the Belterre subdivision. Originally, I had spoken before, actually in opposition of this application. Recently, I've looked at it, and I'm doing this totally on my own. Rarely do anyone ever show up in support of an application. I've done lots of land use matters in my past. I'm an engineer by trade. And I thought I would at least come out here and state that as far as the use of the site, which I believe a lot of the opposition to this as far as being a gas station, I have no objection to the use. Matter of fact, I believe that a lot of folks that are opposing this use are the same folks that will show up and use the facility if it were approved and built. It's been my occasion many times of facilities that have had a lot of opposition to see the same folks that live in the area patronize the facility after it's constructed. I believe the developer, I have met with the developer and asked to see his plan. I think they've done a lot to try to improve, lessen the intensity of the development. I realize that traffic is a concern, but I think that especially if you're deferring this, I believe that there are items that could be done, perhaps trying to extend the right turn lane at Bethany Bend Road, which would prevent people from wanting to cut through the site on the Bethany Bend, which has been expressed in the past. I think a way to get there, I'm a tax-paying citizen of the city of Milton. I'm here of my own volition. I haven't been asked to come here by Mehdi or any of his consultants to speak. I'm doing this on my own volition. But I am a tax-paying citizen. I'd like to see more commercial built in the city of Milton to support a tax base that perhaps maybe the homeowners and landowners that live in the city of Milton are not continued to have to bear the burden of the tax load not only for Fulton County, but also for the city of Milton. So I do ask that you take this into consideration, maybe continue to work with staff, look at some items that maybe could mitigate some of the concerns, and come to a reasonable conclusion that maybe would grant this individual the right to build a business that he feels is suitable for the location. I don't believe he's trying to build something that's destined to fail, and I definitely don't want that. I've expressed that opinion before. But if they can build a successful business that's a contributor to the community, especially from a tax-based standpoint, I'm all in support of that. I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other public comment?
That's all, sir.
Okay, at this point, I can close this hearing. So I'll close this public hearing, and the discussion before we heard public comment was the interest in both the city staff and I believe the council and the applicant in a 30-day deferral until November 15th. Is that correct? And just to clarify, we would go through the entire process that we would have tonight with the rescission, voting on a rescission and then a reconsideration, as well as another hearing. So with that, I'll open it up to council. Is there any? Alan?
Mayor, I make a motion to defer agenda item number 10-1269 to the November 15th City Council meeting.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. I have a motion by Councilmember Tart for deferral until November 15th and a second by Councilmember Lusk. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Is there any opposed? That's unanimous. And I just want to thank not only the citizens' input, but the hard work of our staff, and also the willingness of the applicant to, I believe, is going out of their way to try to work something out. So thank everybody for that. Okay, if the city clerk would please call the next item.
The next item is an agenda item, ZM 1003, VC 1002, requested by Global Payments, Inc., located on Deerfield Parkway, along the west side for a distance of approximately 674.41 feet, 11.62 acres, to modify Condition 2A, 99Z011, 99U008, 99VC007, to replace the current conditional site plan, which was marked received by the Fulton County Environment and Community Development Department on December 11, 1998, with a new site plan received by the City of Milton Community Development Department on September 7, 2010, to delete zoning condition 3B, parking shall be shared with adjacent property zoned C1 community business pursuant to 99Z012, currently zoned O1 office institutional, pursuant to 2007Z019, to request a concurrent variance to reduce the subject property's minimum on-site parking requirement from 122 spaces to 100 spaces, Section 641410. This is agenda item number 10, 1253. First presentation was on October 4th, 2010. Ms. Lynn Tully.
This is a site I think that you all are familiar with. It lies just south of where we're sitting right now. It does include 11.62 acres, which was originally approved for 223,000 square feet of office use. This development includes approximately 40,500 square feet of office use for a data center. The facility is intended to operate for a 24-hour period and expects to employ up to 150 full-time equivalent employees. This will be in shifts, and they will not all be there at the same time. And typically, there may be up to 70 employees in the facility during peak shift periods. We did an extensive analysis, including all other affected departments, regarding this particular request. Staff has reviewed it, and specifically to delete the zoning condition 3B regarding the parking. This original condition spoke to sharing of parking with property to the south. And since they're asking for a variance to reduce the parking that's required, I really don't think that they'll need to share any parking. So staff has then recommended approval to delete that zoning condition. The variance is to reduce the subject property's minimum on-site parking requirement from 122 spaces to 100 spaces. The 122 space requirement is based on our typical office parking requirement. This is not necessarily the typical office. In fact, the ITE trip generation manual does indicate that the trips for a data center or a warehouse center of this type are reduced by approximately a third from your typical office. We expect that parking would also be reduced by at least that amount. This reduction of parking spaces does not appear to offend the spirit or intent of the zoning ordinance. And the request does not cause a substantial detriment to the public good and surrounding properties based on the fact that additional undeveloped and open space will be allowed and assist in preserving the additional specimen trees that are on the property. Staff does recommend approval conditional of VC 10-02. The final condition is to change the existing condition as it references the original 1998 plan to the current site plan received on September 7th, 2010. This revised site plan does meet our development standards with the exception of the parking spaces that have been requested for variance. And again, there are recommended conditions. I'll read those very quickly. They are slightly amended from what has been included in your packet, specifically 4E, and I'll read them all. Number 2, to the owner's agreement to abide by the following. A, to the revised site plan received by the City of Milton Community Development Department on September 7th, 2010. Said site plan is conceptual only and must meet or exceed the requirements of the zoning ordinance and these conditions prior to the approval of a land disturbance permit. Unless otherwise noted herein, compliance with all conditions shall be in place prior to the issuance of the first certificate of occupancy. Number 3, to the owner's agreement to the following site development considerations, striking B and including C, provide a minimum of 100 parking spaces, VC 10-02. And number 4, to the owner's agreement to abide by the following requirements, dedications, and improvements. E, again, remember this is slightly different. At the time of development of the property to the south, a 50-foot access easement is required to provide interparcel access on the subject property's south property line. Easement area shall be cleared and graded prior to the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. F, the applicant is required to meet with and coordinate driveway location with the Milton Public Works prior to submission of a land disturbance plan. And G, the driveway entrance shall provide for the 95% queue with uninterrupted traffic flow onto the main line for combined trips with parcel to the south, RZ 07-019, as approved by Milton Public Works. And those are the conditions as recommended. Are there any questions?
Do you have any questions for Ms. Tully? Bill?
Question on your statement about the International Transportation Engineers
Yes, sir.
Manual guide to reduce parkings or reduce the trips by 1/3, and you also say it's reasonable to conclude that parking for those trips would follow a similar pattern. 122 trips, that's parking spaces, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So if you reduced it by a third, I'd come up with a different number than 100.
It would be more than what they have requested, but they've simply requested to reduce to 100 parking spaces.
That's the owner's concern.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Julie?
Thank you, Mayor. My question also, I guess I have two topics. One is parking. Can you maybe give us an update? It was my understanding that the Design Review Board had reviewed this, and I didn't see any information about the Design Review Board's input. And specifically, I was interested in the conversations that were had between the applicant and the Design Review Board as it relates to parking, because it was my understanding that at one point there was some consideration perhaps of lessening that parking requirement. There
were discussions regarding the parking. I'll address that specifically. let me back up for just a moment. The Design Review Board did hear this as a courtesy item. It's not required for design review
Right.
hearing prior to the use permit, but in order for them to get a better feel for what would be required when they get ready for permit, they asked to go before the board. When the Design Review Board heard it, they had some architectural requirements that they did ask for in addition to what was being shown. Those requirements included a greater height on the wall around the loading area, additional parapet around the roof line along the northern facade. And then there was discussion regarding parking, specifically, should they receive the variance for parking, if they would clear the area and reserve it for green space. In effect, I believe that is what they're doing. They just haven't necessarily called that out on the site plan because everything that's not parking or building at this point is green space. So.
And I don't know what the appropriate time would be, but I would love to get the input of the applicant, perhaps after the staff's
Yes, ma'am.
assessment. Because I guess my question with that is that if the applicant doesn't require 100 spaces, if we don't condition for less than 100, then the applicant would have to incur the cost to build the full 100. And so what I'm interested in finding out through the course of this discussion is just whether or not that applicant does indeed need and want 100, and or if you would be more satisfied with fewer parking spaces. I think the analysis says that the most employees you would ever have on site would be 70. So as you go through your dialogue, if you could speak to that, my perspective being that it would save the applicant money, and we could set that aside without it being a condition to build. And if we can save you money, I'd like to see us be able to do that.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the second is just through the course of this, it looks like the arborist has been on site, and there's a discussion that there's still a densely wooded area other than what's already been cleared. And I didn't see that as a condition to just ensure that that area remained undisturbed. I realize that it's site-specific, but if we can confirm, either Lynn through you or through the city attorney, if to ensure that at no future time that would become a disturbed site, whether or not a condition speaking to that would be helpful or not. So those would be the two things I'd like to get some input on.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions for staff? Bill?
Lynn, in your analysis, existing condition two-way, page
Yes.
10 of 11,
Yes,
in
sir.
the second line, you showed December 11th, 1998. Was that Fulton County's receipt?
Yes, sir. That was the original receipted site plan.
Thank you.
Okay. If I don't have any more questions for our staff, I'd like to hear from those in support of this application. Do we have a comment card?
Yes, sir. We have 2 comment cards in support, none in opposition. Our first comment comes from Harold Buckley, Jr.
Good evening, council members. My name is Harold Buckley. I'm with Alston and Bird, and I'm here before you tonight on behalf of Global Payments in their application for zoning modification and concurrent variances. As Director Tully has explained, the staff is recommending approval of our application with conditions, and with one exception, excuse me, we accept the staff's recommended conditions, and on the one where we have a concern, we would just request slight modifications. The condition that I'm speaking of specifically is listed in the staff report as condition 4E. It currently reads, at the time of development of the property to the south, a 50-foot access easement is required to provide interparcel access to the subject property's south property line. Easement shall be cleared and graded prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. Our concern, and it sounds as though our intent and the staff's intent is the same, our concern is that this condition could be read to require us to provide our neighbor to the south with an easement, and it takes away our ability to fully negotiate that easement. For example, we would want to negotiate an easement where the property owner to the south is responsible for the cost of the driveway that's being provided for their benefit. We also would negotiate an indemnification of us in case any claim came out of the condition of that driveway. And we would also negotiate the easement so that the property owner to the south was responsible for maintaining the driveway. I understand that this is not inconsistent with the staff's position, but I wanted to make sure that no one read that condition to say you have to give them an easement and you don't have an opportunity to negotiate it. So what I would ask is that first sentence be modified slightly to say that at the time of development of the property to the south, a 50-foot access easement as negotiated by the property owners is required. And I think that with that additional language, we would get to the concerns we have about that first sentence. And then the second sentence says, easement shall be cleared and graded prior to the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. It's not clear which CO that's referring to, ours or the property to the south. We would ask that that be clarified to refer to the property to the south, because if it's a requirement for us to do now, we may clear it and find that the property to the south isn't developed for a number of years, and then we have to re-clear it at a future date.
Okay. At this point, if you want to stop the clock, then we can either hear the other person, or we can ask questions from the council. Is there any questions from council?
I mean, I'd love it. I don't know if it's as a matter of order, if we want to hear that next speaker, just because they might address, assuming that speaker.
Let me go ahead and
presentation.
we'll listen to the next speaker, and then
Sure.
welcome to have you come back and answer any questions.
Our next speaker is Mr. Jim Croft.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Jim Croft. I reside at 2090 Coolidge Way in Ackworth, Georgia. And actually, I checked the box that I do not wish to speak. So my comments can be checked into the record. Or I'm the architect for the project, certainly happy to answer any questions that Mayor and Council may have about the project. I do know it thoroughly.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Now I'll go back, and is there any questions of council for the applicant or the applicant's representative?
Thank you, Mayor. If it would be possible, if you could just speak to the parking discussion as to whether or not those 100 parking spaces, do you and the applicant view that 100 as something that indeed you do want to pursue, or were the discussions at the design review board, albeit a courtesy review, that ensued about perhaps reducing that because you didn't need them, thereby it would help save the applicant money? I don't know how best you want to address that, but...
Well, the letter of intent is correct in that during the peak period on the property, during a shift, the number of people will not exceed 70. There may be some overlap during the shift change, which would occur over maybe 30 minutes to an hour, where the number goes north of that. And we certainly would want to have enough parking spaces to accommodate that. So we would be concerned about going below the 100 space number.
Okay. And again, my point in bringing that up is it was my understanding from the design review board that the applicant at one point thought that that would be a benefit and would actually help reduce your cost. Short of it being a condition, just if it be the pleasure of this council as well as the applicant, what I would ask, because it's my understanding that this site plan is still conceptual, that as you look at those parking spaces, if there's an opportunity to reduce the amount of asphalt and/or rather than to have 30 of those spaces be traditional parking, perhaps you have some overflow that would allow it to be less cost impactful to the applicant, and also it would preserve some additional green space that, of course, in some future period, after this use is available, you could always go back and utilize it all. I just hate to see us create additional asphalt, which drives your cost higher, if indeed the full complement of that additional 30 would not be required. So I don't know how we want to handle that with staff, but that would just be a consideration rather than it to have to meet the standards for all 100 parking spaces. The other would just be as it relates to the tree coverage at the back, which I believe, looking at the conceptual site plan, is still intended to be and remain an impacted buffer, but because it's not a condition, if we could just speak to that.
Well, actually, one of the things that we're asking for is to have our current site plan made a condition of our zoning. So to the extent that we would deviate from that site plan in a significant manner, we would certainly have to go back to the staff and more likely than not have to come back before you.
And so with that in mind, I was just going to ask staff if there would be anything that you would recommend to help confirm that the intent, because in some future time, if you guys came back for a zoning modification, that we could at least reflect that the intent this evening, if we are to approve this as reflected, would contemplate the opportunity for reduced parking, or at least in a modified way, depending on how staff would perceive that. But that also that the actual buffer, as shown, would be intended to remain, just so that becomes a matter of record. Because I don't know that right now the analysis kind of speaks to it, but there's not a condition that makes clear that that's the intent of both the applicant and the site plan.
My only comment to that, too, is if I believe the applicant stated that they're looking to rezone this based on this plan here. So, with this, and if you could, address that, but and then we can certainly address the parking, but I wouldn't be in favor of asking the applicant to go less parking than they feel comfortable with, because they're...
No, neither would I, Mayor, and that wasn't the intent. The intent was simply to say that if you are, first was to confirm that, and that if you indeed want to build out close to the 100, is that for those first 70, maybe you meet a particular standard, or maybe it's 80 or 90 of the 100, but for at least a portion of those, if indeed you think that's only going to be a rarity, if at all, is that the conditions or the approach for parking, in order to save the applicant money, that we make sure that we identify that staff would have the ability to modify the development standard of that parking space. So it's not that you wouldn't have the ability, but maybe you have, 10 or 15 of those that are built slightly differently, with less curb and gutter and with less asphalt, which I think would actually be a benefit to the applicant and still gives you maximum flexibility. That was my intent.
Okay. Karen?
A couple questions. Number one, on 4E, I think our whole reason for this condition was initially to make sure we had the interparcel access and didn't have duplicate curb cuts. Is that correct between the things?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, he is stating that he wants it based on negotiating with the neighbor to the south. Negotiations require two people to work together to come up with something. I'd be a little bit hesitant to put that in there, because then you really, it gives them complete upper hand with that piece of property, when clearly it is our intent for them to have access to the property through that. I don't know how it can be worded, but I just, saying that they have the right to, based on negotiations is a little bit too broad for me.
And I might want to clarify that too with Ken, because basically the reason for that is to have interparcel access, obviously with the next property owner. But to your point, you may not, whenever that property is developed, or they may have a different plan. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to put an access point somewhere, and then when it comes time to develop, then it really should be in another place or whatever. Ken, are you familiar, and what's your thoughts? I see both sides of this, where I see Councilmember Thurman's point. Yeah, if you just tell somebody in the future you have to get along and come up with an agreement, but I can also see the applicant's point too, not wanting to be locked into something that have no control of, and it is their property. Ken, do you have any?
Well, Mr. Buckley and I are old hands at interparcel access. He knows what I'm talking about up in another jurisdiction, not this one. It's funny this has come up this evening. I wasn't thinking about this. I think the key is, and Councilmember Thurman, going back to your point, is you don't want to instill in something where negotiations are all one-sided and put that into effect. I understand that. And Mr. Mayor, may I ask Mr. Buckley a question?
Sure.
Mr. Buckley, what's the concern with respect to negotiation? What do you think the topic to be negotiated would be?
The concern would be that at the time the property owner to the south is prepared to go forward with either a zoning modification to change their site plan or permits, they would turn to us and say, we're ready to go, we have filed our zoning application or a permit application, and per your condition of zoning, you're required to give us an easement. And and we don't have to negotiate with you. The city has said you've got to give it to us, so give it to us. And then we wouldn't have the opportunity to negotiate the protections that I talked about, the indemnification, the maintenance, the construction costs. But having been on the other side of the table, I do appreciate the concern that the council has raised. What I would submit to you is that because this zoning modification is a legislative action, if global payments were to be just completely beyond the pale unreasonable, it is within your authority to go back into this zoning modification and revise that condition at a future time.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, too, there's got to be some kind of language where it would have to be within reason, and if you had to get appraisers involved or whatever to come to reasonable terms.
Mr. It's on, and Mr. Buckley, the access easement is on the site plan. I mean, would your client be willing to agree to at least let the site plan control on location?
I'm looking to Mark Bowen.
I mean, because once you have location and you have width, then the rest of Mr. Buckley's issues are the only thing left to negotiate. And that does give everyone a little more of an equal playing field, seems to me.
Okay. Let's see what this client.
And that it would still be a required easement. It's just a function of who's paying for certain
And the
components.
indemnities and some of the concerns he's raising, but we wouldn't be
But
talking
you're not
about
blocking someone else. You're not blocking the property
where
owner south
width.
ever not having.
That'd be
Right.
done.
Global Payments is willing to make that commitment, that will be the location of the easement, and it will not come back and try to change the location.
So can you reword 4E for us, Ken? Based on what he has said?
Yeah, it would be, at the time of development of the property to the south, a 50-foot access easement per the zoning site plan is required to be provided for interparcel access on the subject property's south property line.
So you basically just inserted per the received or the revised site plan dated as of
That's fine.
tonight or something.
Basically, I'm just talking about after the word access easement per the revised
But he had
zoning.
added some additional language that he wanted in there.
Now, we'll just take all that out.
Yeah, that doesn't matter. We'll put the two lawyers in a room and let them fight it out.
Yeah, okay. We get a long break for that?
Being clear.
All right. Let's, Alan, you have a question?
What's the date of that site plan right there?
September 7th.
Okay, thank you.
Bill?
Mr. Buckley,
Yes.
would you state your proposed revision to the second sentence then? As regards to clearing and grading.
The easement shall be cleared and graded prior to the issuance of the certificate of occupancy on the property to the south. If I may, with regard to the first sentence, I'm still concerned that even if we say per the zoning site plan, that gets us with regard to the location. But I would still ask the council to maybe clarify that first sentence to say that although we're required to provide an easement, we do have the ability to negotiate the three issues that I talked about, the construction costs, the maintenance, and the indemnification.
And I'm comfortable with that,
Okay.
so long as we have the location in there.
I'm not comfortable, though, with the cleared and graded prior to the issuance of the certificate of occupancy for the second building, because, you get a certificate of occupancy and you still have to go in and construct the
Well, but it's prior. It's prior. They
Yeah,
would-
but, you could do it, you could go in and do the clearing and grading and get it, get certificate of occupancy the next day, and you still have to construct the actual road and everything.
Yeah, what that would say is that the property to the south would not be able to receive their CO until that easement and roadway and all the construction's done, so.
Okay, well, then it needs to say more than just clearing and grading, because clearing and grading is a long
Yeah.
way from being a finished product to drive
Well,
on.
if I might add something to that, the condition was originally written such that this property would go ahead and clear and grade the easement so that the location and elevations were established over to the property to the south. We didn't have them
They're not
to the
actually
extent
paving the road.
pave and curb and
Right.
gutter and that. But the
Well, that
intent
makes
of that
sense.
condition was that when this property was graded, it would go ahead and establish that location for the access to the property to the south.
So when it's rough graded, it's the
Yes, sir.
areas there. But does that tie in with, you tie that in with the location and the site plan, but also with the applicant's concerns?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Bill?
I tend to agree with Mr. Buckley that rather defer that clearing and grading until time that the property to the south is developed. There's no assurance of when that property is going to be developed. And I hate to see land cleared and laid fallow for a number of years. Just my opinion.
Well, if we've already said that the easement itself is going to be site plan specific, then there's no need to clear it because we've already designated where it is on, at least on the site plan. And I think the reason for clearing and grading is so you know where it's going to definitely be.
To some extent. You go back and forth with these things a lot of times. When the property to the south comes in to develop, if the access is already there, the issues have already been worked through, they tie in, they move on. We'll fight this battle at one point. We'll either fight it now getting it established, or we'll fight it when the property to the south comes in to establish that easement, to gain access, to gain construction easements. All of those things will happen at that time. So our intent with the original condition was just to simplify that process in the future and go ahead and get the majority of that construction completed.
And it sounds like it's 6 or half dozen one way, 6 half dozen the other way. Is there?
I'm just wondering if we couldn't, and Robin actually had this idea, and it makes a lot of sense to me, if to go ahead and get the easement recorded. Once you get it, once you got the easement recorded, then that really will obviously even the playing field as well. Once your easement's recorded, then you know location, you know width, and then they can discuss and negotiate amongst themselves who's going to do all the various aspects of it, and that I think would take away or at least minimize the concern about going ahead and having to clear and grade it. I mean, it's
once it's recorded though, it's a done deal?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we're trying to establish now, is that it's a done deal, except for the issues of more of the practical things, like who's actually going to do the build out and things of that nature.
To me, and I know I'm not a lawyer, but doesn't it seems like that goes against exactly what the applicant's concerned about. I mean, how do you? I don't know. It seems like then it flops it the other way.
Well, they've got a zoning condition that's going to require this, and that's the end of the day. And so it seems to me that the quicker it's recorded, the quicker that's nailed.
But if it's recorded, the easement's recorded, but the clearing and grading is not done, and the physical drive is not in there, would that allow the applicant then? Let's say someone purchased the property, or the owner of the property wanted to take advantage of that easement. Would that put this property owner in the position where they could negotiate with them because it's, hey, we got to give you an easement, but you've got to you got to pay the cost of doing it, and you got to do this and that, or
that would depend upon the language you put in this condition. Is the point, and that's.
But I think that's what the applicants, their concern is, correct? That you don't want to come back later and have to spend money on somebody else's whim.
Well, right, and if we record the easement now, certainly, but even if we have the condition in place that says you have to provide the neighbor with an easement, and they come to us and say, okay, it's time, do it, and we say, well, what about the cost, what about the maintenance, what about the indemnification? They can say, well, you go pound sand, it's in your zoning, or it's recorded, and it's done. You can't sell the same easement, twice, euphemistically speaking. Once it's done, it's done.
Well, the easement, though, is for the piece of property. It's not for the improvements on the property, correct?
Well, the easement is for that stub piece that is dashed out at the end.
But it's not for the improvements on that. So, I mean, they would still have to put in the curb and gutter and paving and all that.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's where what's up in the air.
Okay, but if the only requirement is convey the easement, once they convey the easement, their obligation is done. And if the southern property owner comes to them and says, what they're going to say, I want you to grade it for me, I want you to pave it, you can say no. So we don't want to do that. You do it, or don't enjoy it.
So what you're saying, the easement would basically just say that you have the right, the southern property owner, the right to use this easement access, but they would have to negotiate the costs, or who does it and whatnot?
I don't know that there'd be much of a negotiation.
Right.
I mean, they will have satisfied their obligation upon the recordation of the easement. That's the way I would see it.
This curb cut that's shown here serves both properties, right?
Right.
Serve this property and the south side. So the south property owner is really getting the benefit of the curb cut. So I think I'd rather put in a little access road there rather than deal with some governmental jurisdiction to put a curb cut in.
I mean, you could say that when the property to the south comes, to you for approval, you could put a condition on them saying that they have to get the easement from us. And that way, the timing lines up more cleanly than now when we don't know when that property is going to come in.
Is there a way to, and the only obstacle to that I could see is, devil's advocate, that Global Payments may say, well, we want $1 million or whatever to do that. That might be totally outrageous. But is there a way to define it that, obviously we can't say a number, but that, they have to mutually come to agreement on what, a reasonable cause is, if they have to use appraisers or estimators or whatever, so that if it ever does come back in front of us, or I don't know if it'd go to a court then if they couldn't. I'm going to assume that whoever would buy that property, the south piece of property, and do something, would have a negotiation worked out before they actually bought it.
I mean, you would think that would be part of their due diligence on the sale, is what you would think.
But how can we make something that
it's always
that
difficult.
the city feels comfortable with, but also the applicant?
I'll go back to Councilmember Thurman's point. It's always difficult to say things, and lawyers love this. The parties shall, in good faith, do this. And, and you do the best you can, and all we have to work with is words. And so you do the best you can. And it seems to me if we're going to go that route, then the zoning condition we were working on is maybe where we just keep going and just try to say that the location of the easement is going to be subject to the submitted site plan, but the parties have to work out all the ancillary topics that Mr. Buckley was talking about, like the indemnity and who's going to pave and who's going to do the work. So we could do it that way.
Is that you'd be comfortable with that way?
I sure would.
How about Mr. Buckley? Would you?
With that addition, I think that would get us where we need to be, because it certainly would help level the playing field between the two parties.
Okay.
Quick question. So at the risk that that one party and the other don't in the future come to a conclusion, what would then dictate a conclusion being arrived at?
Well, I'll give you an example. Let's say the property owner to the south comes in and says, I need an easement from Global Payments, and Global Payments says, aha, we got you. If you give us $20 million, you can have your 50-foot stub. Well, we still have this zoning modification in place where you as the city council, the mayor and council, have the authority on your own volition to go in and modify this condition. You could put it the way you want it now, but at least you wouldn't have disadvantaged us from the outset.
And I'm just wondering if we don't need, in addition to the language that's already been modified, is something that captures that end potential, that just, short of having to go back through this entire process.
I guess what sounds like, though, that we can do this in good faith, but there's always a chance that there might be an issue at the end. But all we can do now is try to plan for appropriate. Hopefully, it will be handled appropriately. And I guess the question really would be, what happens if Global Payments and the property owner of the South came to butted heads on it?
Right.
Where would that go?
Eventually, you all would begin, and Carter would begin, and Lynn would begin to get phone calls, and there will be a request that someone probably from the city intervene to make both sides reasonable, for fear of the sort of things that Mr. Buckley's talking about right now, which is that you all have to open this matter back up again. Mm-hmm. So that's the way it would work. That's my experience, at least.
Okay. Bill, you?
By granting this one curb cut, are we denying the property owner to the south any additional curb cut in the future?
On Deerfield, both parcels have a condition for interparcel access. It's actually an existing curb cut. This is the only median break there.
Okay, so the city has some responsibility then in ensuring that there is interparcel connectivity then.
And this, you know, the interparcel easement is not just that stub. I mean, the interparcel easement will have to make that connection down to Deerfield Parkway. So it would have to cover not only the stub, but, you know, the portion of the drive to get them across the property and to their access point.
And that's a plus for the south property owner too, which hopefully as they're negotiating, they realize that'd be cheaper than them running their own road and a curb cut if it could be had. But I guess I'm going back to kind of both sides of our legal, kind of agree somewhere down the middle that we're protected as well as we can be expected to, and the applicant is protected too. Would you say that, Ken?
I would. I think, again, I'll go back and say that 4E needs to have a reference to the location of the easement, which appears to be agreed upon, and to the extent the concern is that there are going to be other issues that arise between the southern property owner and this applicant that need to be negotiated, we can just reach out and put that in the condition. And so when the southern property owner comes to the applicant and says, time for my easement, that'll at least give the applicant the ability to rip out these conditions and say, no, even the city council anticipated there would be other items that we needed to negotiate, and these are what they are.
Would you care to perhaps language that?
I
think that's what we're getting at.
I've got something drafted. Have you already got something drafted, Ken?
I don't.
Okay.
So.
Do you just play while you're on TV? Start or?
I have a question before I read it and see if everybody agrees to it, though. The applicant had suggested that we insert the phrase "on the property to the south" after that second sentence, so it read, easement area shall be cleared and graded prior to the issuance of the certificate of occupancy on the property to the south. Is staff okay with that or not?
Well, it was originally written to relate to the certificate of occupancy on this property. So if we're talking about the property to the south, I would just delete that sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how's that?
We would not oppose that action.
What?
We would not be opposed to deleting the sentence.
So if staff's not opposed to that, it would now read, and y'all tell me if this is what you are both agreeable to. At the time of development of the property to the south, a 50-foot access easement as depicted on the revised site plan dated September 7, 2010 is required to provide interparcel access on the subject property's south property line. Relative to this easement, the applicant reserves the right to negotiate the following three issues with the property owner to the south: construction, maintenance cost, indemnification. That would be the end of the condition.
That sounds acceptable to us. That works.
Ken, is that? Yeah. Ken, does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense. But as it got read, I had even a few more questions. And again, I don't want to muck it up or over-lawyer it, but I guess just the easement itself. I mean, just things like, and again, you don't want to think you have to say this, but the fact that the easement is supposed to inure to the benefit of the southern property owner, it needs to be recordable. Things of that nature. I mean, again, that we could either go into all that or just leave it and just understand that everybody gets what we're talking about. But there's supposed to be a beneficiary of the easement. That would be the southern property.
But isn't that kind of understood?
Well, you'd think so. But if you've done this long enough, that a lot of people can think everyone understands what that's supposed to mean, and then lawyers get hold of it, and no one knows what it means. But yes, Mr. Mayor, the answer to your question is yes. That's probably it.
I mean, again, we just can't. We don't have a crystal ball and all that.
Or if you have a sentence you can add.
You know what? I think, Councilmember Tartt, yours was just fine with respect to the additions that you added on there. And I guess we would just have to act, quite frankly, upon the goodwill of the parties to get what the council has in mind. And quite frankly, we've created a record of it right now by way of this dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Bill?
One last point. Does recording of this easement assume that access to the south property cannot be denied in to Karen's point, I guess, prior to certificate of occupancy, the south property owner really needs access as soon as a land disturbance permit is granted.
Well, and that, of course, gets to the issue of what is at the time of development.
Is that something that
We took that
obviously
piece about the
staff-
certificate of occupancy out.
Right, but the original language now says that at the time of development, ostensibly of the southern piece, what does that mean? Does that mean when the land development permit's been issued, or does that mean when sticks and bricks begin to go up? When is that exactly?
Well, is it safe to say that the property owner from the south can't begin doing anything on their property until that access is there?
Absolutely.
I don't know how they would get to the
So-
property.
That's exactly right.
Well, they do have a right-in, right-out access.
Okay, you got another, okay. Well, again, I just don't want to over-lawyer this and have nobody satisfied. We can get it reasonable. So I guess I'll, if there's other questions or concerns, but then we can go back and maybe the motion maker, we can clarify Mr. Tart's statement and confirm that the applicant and our city attorney is okay with that. So do we have any other questions? Julie?
I just wanted to come back to the point about flexibility within parking, not to diminish the 100. And what I'm wondering, between the applicant and our staff, Mrs. Tully, if within the condition that exists that talks about the 100, could we insert something that would say something similar to provide a minimum of 100 parking spaces with the flexibility of staff working with the applicant to modify the standards to allow for more pervious surfaces for a portion of the parking. Again, my intent is simply to say, if you guys find, as you continue through this process, that between the 80th and the 100th, or the 90th and the 100th, if you would envision that it would benefit you, that you, working with staff, would then have that flexibility, whereas if we don't modify it to that extent, you're forced under a certain development standard, which is going to raise your cost.
I guess to clarify that, though, and to make sure Councilmember Bailey's and the cities and the applicant clarify that, from what I'm hearing is that it kind of leaves it in the applicant's corner to, you can build up to 100 parking spots, which I think is what, the maximum you want. But it's under your purview as the applicant working with the city. If you say, hey, we only need to do 80 right now, that allows the city's flexibility to grant them to do less if they choose to. And then they can always look at other options. I know a lot of times it's more expensive to do the non-pervious, so I don't want to throw any other additional cost on the applicant. But if they choose to do that, maybe you can work with them. Industry standards, maybe to do less curb and gutter or something that offsets the cost, so that it's not an additional cost, but it allows the applicant to do less if that works for them, and they always come back and add up to 100 after that.
And Mayor, that is the intent, and it's also the intent to do it in such a way that it would preclude the applicant from having to go through with your attorneys through a variance process. So I'm trying to give the maximum flexibility with the potential for cost savings and a benefit to both the applicant and the city with maximum flexibility.
And we're fine with that.
And then my question would be to staff, do you agree with the way that was languaged, or do you or Ken have a more appealing way that you'd like to phrase it?
I would suggest that that you ask the applicant then to provide a minimum of 80 parking spaces with up to 100 available, with the difference to be either pervious or other optional types of paving systems as per, I'll lay it on me, as per the Director of Development.
But I think that's requiring.
The only problem I have with that is that's throwing additional cost burden on the applicant.
And again,
Well,
that's
that
not
would
how
have
it's...
the option.
The option, if it's an option.
Right, with the option. It's intended to be an option, so I'm just trying to
Or
make
the
sure
intent, and the intent, maybe the staff, if the staff can find, between working with the staff and the applicant, if they can find a way to save money on, say, curb and gutter, whatnot, and, maybe the pervious comes out to where it's a wash, then the applicant could do that, but...
And it may be that the applicant finds that as they continue through this process, that you really don't want to build out at the full 100. You want that flexibility But it would be to your benefit not to build all 100. You'd still have the space available to allocate for that. So I think we're all kind of saying the same thing. The question is, how do we make sure to language it in a way that captures that?
Could we not just give the authority to the development director to instead of having to come back through here, if they come out with, they need, whatever what the number is, but just give it the authority to the development director to say, nix those spaces, or
How about if we state it to where the applicant has the ability to install up to 100 parking spots, but that they also have the ability to work with the community development director to install less or alternative parking on some of those spaces if mutually agreed upon,
Okay.
if that makes
Do we
sense.
have to put a minimum in there since that's one of our zoning requirements?
I would recommend we put a minimum or give a percentage of that 100.
So if we go
say
back to the
20%
minimum of
is
80
flexible.
with the flexibility up to 100 to either be the current standards and/or alternative standards that would be mutually agreeable to both the staff and the applicant for pervious approaches and/or other alternatives to be determined by those same parties. I think that's what it is, right?
And I think that allows the applicant to work with staff if that benefits the applicant, but it doesn't hamstring them to only 80 parking spaces. They have a maximum of 100. Okay. You can word that when we get to a motion. We'll confirm that. Any other, Alan? I think you had your hand raised. Joe, you have anything?
I've just got some recommended language for that, but we can. This
Let's,
point, I don't even know what I wrote.
Yeah, let's. Is there any other issues or subjects that? If not, we can open this up to a motion of some sort and get some wording done here and make sure that everybody's on board with it.
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Mayor. I'll take a shot at it.
You don't play a lawyer, do you?
No, sir.
TV.
Just contractor. Make a motion to approve zoning agenda, well, it's zoning application ZM 10-03/VC10-02 as requested by Global Payments Incorporated, located on Deerfield Parkway along the west side for a distance of approximately 674.41 feet, 11.62 acres. To modify condition 2A, it's 99Z-011, 99U-008, 99BC-007, to replace current conditional site plan, which was marked received by the Fulton County Environment Community Development Department on December 11th, 1998, with a new site plan received by the City of Milton Community Development Department on September 7, 2010. And here we go. To delete zoning condition 3B, parking shall be shared with adjacent property zone C1, community business, pursuant to 99Z-012, currently zoned O&I, office institutional, pursuant to 2007Z-019, to request a concurrent variance to reduce the subject property's minimum on-site parking requirement. And here I'll defer to our Director of Community Development.
All right, to provide a minimum of 80 parking spaces at a paved standard, with additional spaces to be constructed with options for design standards, as per the Community Development Director.
And would we want to say up to the maximum of 100?
Up to 100.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, up
Additional
to
20.
100 parking spaces.
And also,
And then let me just clarify this, excuse me, Bill. Does that allow them to do all 100 in the traditional paving if they so choose?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
and further to recommended condition number 4, to the owner's agreement to abide by the following requirements, dedications, and improvements. And here I'll defer to Alan's legalese on that point.
Okay. Condition 4E of staff's recommended conditions should read, at the time of development of this property to the south, a 50-foot access easement as depicted on the revised site plan dated September 7, 2010, is required to provide interparcel access on the subject property's south property line. Relative to this easement, the applicant reserves the right to negotiate with the property owner to the south the following three issues: construction, maintenance costs, and indemnification.
Ken, you're okay with that?
Yes.
Mr. Buckley, does that make sense to you?
Yes, I think so.
Then going on to 4F, applicant is required to meet with and coordinate driveway location with Milton Public Works prior to submission of land disturbance plan. 4G, driveway entrance shall provide for the 95% queue with uninterrupted traffic flow onto the main line for combined trips with parcel to the south. It's RZ07-019 as approved by Milton Public Works.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, I've got a motion by Councilmember Luss, second by Councilmember Bailey. I'll open it up for discussion. One thing I'd like to just say is I want to commend Global Payments and say how excited I am to see the development of this type. We sit up here and talk about appropriate development in appropriate areas, and we've got a lot of open and rural area in Milton, but we've also got some really nice commercial areas and office and uses of this type, and I just want to say we'd be proud to have you guys here, and certainly have my commitment that we'll work with you guys the best we can within reason, and it's great for the city to have some tax base and 70 new jobs or jobs for people. So just want to thank you guys for being here and choosing Milton. So
Thank you so much.
Second.
got any other comments? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you, sir. Okay, we'll move on to unfinished business.
Our first item under unfinished business is approval of an ordinance to amend Chapter 58, Utilities, of the City of Milton Code of Ordinances to establish commercial car wash water recycling requirements, to repeal conflicting provisions, to provide for severability, to provide for an effective date, and for other purposes. This is agenda item number 10-1254, discussed at September 13th work session, first presentation on October 4th. Mr. Ken Gerard.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, you have in front of you this evening a proposed ordinance requiring the use of recycled water systems at in-bay and conveyor car washes. This is something that has been we have been directed to adopt per the Metro District with respect to water conservation measures. It has been the subject of a work session. It is quite brief. I believe you'll see the operational language on page 2, section 58-178, and this is the key provision. All new, read new, so no retrofits, all new in-bay automatic car washes and conveyor car washes permitted and constructed after January 1st of 2011 must install operational recycled water systems. You'll note that phrase is defined on page 1, which means a water system that captures and reuses water regardless of the source previously used in wash or rinse cycles. Mr. Mayor, that's all.
Okay. And the question I'll ask, I'm asking the past just to make sure that this is typical and we're not going into anything over and above what's typical in the industry. And the only other thing, I believe I've asked you, Ken, that I do own part of a company that makes recycle equipment for car washes, so if I need to stand by, rescind myself or...
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir. That's too attenuated of an interest.
Okay. All right, any questions for staff, Alan?
Question, I hate to ask a question on something that appears as obvious as this. However, I have a board appointee that is the owner of a well-known car wash in Milton. And she recycles water, by the way. And her comment was, and I just want staff's opinion on this, instead of redefining everything using different words, there was a suggestion to just include in our ordinance that Milton is in agreement with the requirements of SB 466, which in her opinion has more teeth than what is being recommended by staff, and therefore the city would not run into any language conflicts that could invalidate the city's ordinance if someone were to challenge it in the future. I'm not familiar with SB 466.
I'm not either. So
It happens to be the piece of legislation that she served on the committee to write up, so she's real familiar with it. She had talked to me about the same issue.
Okay.
I guess the problem is if both of you lawyers aren't familiar with it, then,
This is one I'm happy to overlawyer. This one, it's one paragraph, it's one sentence. Now, to be fair, it does have, 4 definitions that go with it, and quite frankly, I believe this may be the Metro's model ordinance that they recommended that we draft or recommended that we implement. It's probably not far removed from that. If we wanted to defer it, let me pull the SB 466 and look at it and see if I see a conflict. Happy to do that.
is that a big issue for you guys?
No, we just need to have it done by the turn of the year.
Okay. Is council okay with that?
I think that'd be a good idea, because I would like our definitions especially to mirror those that are in the Senate bill, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Would you need to the first meeting in November?
Absolutely, that'd be fine. If there's any comment, let's go ahead and take it, and otherwise, let's defer, and we'll bring you back a report on that.
Okay. All right, well, if there's no other questions, then
I'll make a motion.
make a motion.
I'll make a motion to defer agenda item 10, 12, 54 to I believe it's the November the 1st meeting,
I'll second it.
2010.
Okay, we have a motion for deferral from Councilmember Hewitt, second by Councilmember Thurman. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's unanimous. City Clerk, please say on the next item.
Next item is approval of an ordinance to amend Chapter 62, Vehicles for Hire, Article 2, Taxi Cabs of the City of Milton Code of Ordinances. Agenda item number 10, 1255. First presentation was on October 4th, 2010. Mr. Ken Gerard.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we have, in fact, some language in our current ordinances that addresses these issues, but I believe the city manager and I, in light of some issues that have come up with respect to the breadth of our current language, thought that bringing you back a new vehicle for hire ordinance might make sense. And so I want to walk you through the components of it right now and say at the outset that one of the driving considerations of this was the sort of intermingling between what we consider, I think, bona fide taxi cabs and limousines. And we were having some issues that were popping up with the notion of, do we really want a limousine to have a lighted sign on the top of it driving around indicating that it's a car for hire? And unfortunately, our code was not done well enough to make those sorts of obvious distinctions. This one does. And so I want to walk you through sort of this new framework. This proposed ordinance basically envisions 3 types of certificates being issued by the city. These certificates are annual certificates. They will need to be renewed annually with the payment of a fee. The first you have would be what's called a certification of public necessity. This would go to the operators of these establishments. And the criteria by which you get a certificate of public necessity and convenience is at the bottom of your first page, 6220. And if you go to the next page, it talks about the fact that the application will be made to the city police department. Again, this goes to the operator. This is not a driver certification, nor is it a certification of the actual vehicle, but this is more of a broad, the license to conduct this operation at all. in the city, and it is anticipated that every operator that has a business in the city will have one of these certificates of public necessity. You can see the various criteria they have to establish or have to satisfy the city police department, including in C, the establishment and maintenance of an office in a commercially zoned area, submission of a copy of the operator's current lease, establishment and maintenance of a publicly listed telephone number, maintenance on file of all of their drivers, number 5, maintenance of lawful off-street parking, and also, of course, very critical is the insurance requirement. That is one of the requirements that is required. The next, at the bottom of page 2, is the taxi cab permit requirement, and this, of course, would be for the actual vehicle. Once again, this is going to be a permit issued by the City Police Department, and it requires a copy of a valid 6-month auto insurance policy. As you will see, a common theme of this is to make sure that the operators of vehicles for hire in the City of Milton have proper and reasonable insurance. In C on page 3, you'll see that no taxi cab permit shall be issued for a vehicle with a model year more than 6 years old. It has to have more than 3 doors, not including the driver's door. There has to be a taximeter, which is, of course, is basically the mechanism that establishes how much the user owes. It's the basis by which the taxi cab fee is set. There also has to be an F, a dry compartment for luggage. You have to have also, with respect to G, no taxi cab permit shall be issued for a taxi that does not bear on the outside various information like a taxi permit, fare information, and the owner and operator. And finally, of course, on the next page, you'll see the top light, which is something we're customarily used to seeing with respect to vehicles for hire that hopefully will differentiate it from things like limousines. Finally, on Section 6222, in addition to the certificate of necessity and also the taxi cab permit, now you get into the driver's permit, which will also be issued by the City Police Department. And this will, of course, go to the actual individuals that are the drivers of the taxi cabs. They have to have, number 1, a current valid Class C Georgia driver's license, be competent to operate a motor vehicle. Number 3, be familiar with the traffic laws. Number 4, provide authorization information necessary to enable the City Police Department to investigate the individual's background. There also has to be information conspicuously located within the cabin of the taxi cab, one of which is a map or street guide, as reflected in B1, the name and photograph of the driver, and a schedule of fares. Continuing further, you see those sorts of offenses that would disqualify an individual for being a driver in the City of Milton. Going on to the next page. On 6223, you find information with respect to the conspicuous posting of the fare information. Obviously, it's quite customary for local jurisdictions to want to make sure their citizens know exactly what and how much they will have to pay to use a vehicle for hire. 6224 pertains to the duration of the various permits I've just discussed, including the fact that there will be a fee schedule that will be set by the City Council with respect to the various fees, primarily for renewal of both the convenience, the certification of convenience, the driver's permit, and the taxi cab permit. Finally, the remainder of this proposed ordinance are those mechanisms for the appeal and suspension of the various permits in the case of malfeasance or wrongdoing by either the operator, the owner of the business, or the drivers themselves, including setting forth the hearing requirements and the grounds upon which the council can deny or suspend. In that way, you might think of this very much closely akin to the alcohol code. That's sort of the framework which you can consider this in, is that once you grant the license, it's not permanent, and certainly an operator can commit actions that result in the license being suspended or revoked. And, Mr. Mayor, that is a summary of this ordinance.
Okay. Do I have any questions for Karen?
I do have a question. 62-20
Yes, ma'am.
says all operators prior to operating any taxi cab within the city or allowing any driver to operate a taxi cab within any city shall do all these things. Does that mean if we get a taxi cab down at the airport and the driver does not have an office within the City of Milton, he has to drop you off at the city limit?
It would mean...
It doesn't, passing through it doesn't.
Right. No, we're talking about businesses that are
Located.
located.
That's not how this reads. It says if you're operating a vehicle within the city. And that means that anybody operating a vehicle within, a taxi cab within the city would have to comply with all these things, or else they have to drop you off at the city limits.
Well, I think up in the definitions under operator, it covers that, doesn't it?
Right. I mean, I think the notion of the operator, which has to cross-reference back to the definition, means any person or entity operating a business within an office located within the corporate limits of the city. However, to Councilmember Thurman's point, I concur and can see where that would cause some issues. So that might be a situation where we want to clean that language up just a little bit.
I would just think you need to state in here that it is city. Well, somehow or another that it is the city Milton-based operators.
Domiciled. in
Yeah,
this.
domiciled or something, so it doesn't look like they had to drop you off at the city limits.
Agreed. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Julie?
Thank you. Just under section 6222, item number under A2, which just says be competent to operate a motor vehicle. Is that defined enough? I mean, competency obviously is up to interpretation sometimes, so that's my question.
Right. I mean, yeah, I think the intent is to encapture a lot of things with that, not only competent to maintain and hold a commercial grade driver's license, but also, I mean, competency can even go to, making sure that you're not impaired by alcohol, drugs, things of that nature.
And I realize we covered those other things, I think, elsewhere, so that's why I just wondered if we needed any more definition or if you think that that is sufficiently broad.
I could be talked out of the fact that 2 is, quite frankly, redundant. I could be talked into the fact that 2 is redundant of 1, because I think if you can carry the commercial grade driver's license, then that sort of subsumes the fact that you at least have convinced someone that you're competent to have that license in the first place.
And I don't mind having it, I just didn't know if, because it was vague, if that presented any problems. Or do you intentionally want it to be vague so it captures those things that may not be defined?
It's a little bit of a catch-all, that's
Okay,
right.
that's fine.
And it may, in fact, present us with some options we might not have.
Okay, that's fine, so therefore we'll leave it, or I would recommend that we just leave it as is. Thank you for the answer.
Okay, Phil?
Ken, how does this address, or do we need to address pedicabs, animal-drawn vehicles? Savannah has...
That's right, and it's a great point, and right now, the way this is set up, it doesn't address them at all.
Right.
And that would need to be something that would need to be further refined, because it's not really contemplating this. In fact, the definition of taxi cab is limited to a motor vehicle.
Right.
So to the extent we want to get into those sorts of other means, we would need to.
Is that something that might be better to address, once we have an issue where we ever have pedicabs and bicycle-drawn,
Well, certainly you want to address it, as it presents a problem. Right now, I think that the city manager just felt like this was an issue, particularly getting the confusion between limousines and taxi cabs we needed to address first. Maybe get this on the books, then we'll amend it.
Okay.
We're not going to make horses put a light on their head.
You could.
Okay.
May I make a recommendation, if you can, real quick, with respect to Councilmember Thurman's point on 6220A? The parenthetical, prior to operating any taxi cab, that whole phrase there between the commas can really just be taken out. As contemplated by OCGA 366025, all operators, take out the next line, shall apply for and obtain. And I think because you've got a cross-reference back to operators being within the city of Milton, I think you've taken care of the concern you raised, and I think it's a good catch.
Question on the insurance requirements. Does this comply with other jurisdictions out there that provide this service? They seem like low limits.
Yeah, I was going to say that
Extremely
as well.
low.
Well, these are going to be the minimum limits, and you, of course, have the ability to set things in addition to the minimum limits, and if you want to, you can. But I think what we just tried to capture was the minimum required by law.
Okay. And one last one. I've been in several other cities in the United States and had issues with cab drivers that could not speak the American language. What issues would we have with the requirement speaking English.
Let me think about that just for a second.
Doesn't that really go to what clientele they're trying to serve? I mean, if they're trying to serve a clientele that doesn't speak English and the drivers don't speak English, then that seems to make some sense.
Well, it may not always be the case.
But is that something that the market would?
Well, I just want to make sure that the city council has wide discretion pursuant to your police powers to adopt ordinances. I just want to make sure that a language requirement would be rationally linked back to the competency of them to actually perform this function. Now, I think an argument could be made if all of your traffic signs or some of your directional signs are in English, that certainly that would be required. And it makes me wonder if there is, for instance, to get a Class C commercial grade driver's license, ostensibly there is, I would assume, a test. I would assume the test is in English, but I can't sit here and tell you that they don't have perhaps a version of the test that's not in English. I just don't know the answer to that.
One point, just a little aside, got a delivery to a project that we had a couple of years ago in tractor trailer. Driver was from Texas, and even though he had, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, watch where you're going with that.
And although he got close to where he's supposed to, he had no idea of the language on the directional signs. And I don't think this precludes an operator or an operator's driver from having an out-of-state license, does it?
No. It doesn't preclude that, but now a requirement to get the driver's permit is to have a Class C Georgia driver's license. So while they could have another one if they had that, they have to have one in Georgia as well. Councilmember Luss, the short answer to your question is I would have to really think about that. On the one hand, I don't see, I can see it being related to the function they're providing. I mean, obviously the navigation through English traffic signs and things of those natures is something worth considering, but I don't know how far down the line we can go with that.
Just to clarify, I know our city manager felt pretty comfortable with this and saw a need. So in your opinion, would this be something we pass, and then if we see some things we tweak, that's
this
what might be an issue comes down, or the other items we talked about?
I've already heard some good comments tonight that have obviously, that are food for thought for perhaps revising this, but it might be something we can go ahead and get on the books.
Mm-hmm.
And then tweak it. Not only the alternative means of the transport, the horses, et cetera, but even this issue.
Okay. I think Alan has a question. Or
I have a motion.
Motion.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to approve an ordinance to amend Chapter 62, Vehicles for Hire, Article 2, Taxi Cabs of the City of Milton Code of Ordinances. Agenda item number 10-1255 is recommended by staff with the following deletion of the phrase, prior to operating any taxi cab within the city or allowing any driver to operate a taxi cab within the city, which would be under Section 62-20, paragraph A, I guess that is.
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion by Councilmember Tarr, a second by Councilmember Thurman. Do you have any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay, will City Clerk please sound the next item?
Next item is approval for the removal of Billy Lovelace Hauling from the list of approved solid waste haulers for the City of Milton due to noncompliance with the ordinance. This is agenda item number 10-1140. Public hearing deferred on May 17th. Public hearing again deferred on June 21st. Public hearing was held on August 16th. Matt Marietta.
Good evening. Based on the public hearing that we had on August 16th, I understood my instructions to be to work with the company to try to rectify the situation. I spoke with the representative that came here and spoke with you all that night, and the next day she provided us with a check to meet the first quarterly payment that was due at the time that we had this initial public hearing. Let me correct that. The quarterly payment that was immediately preceding the public hearing. That check subsequently bounced, came back insufficient funds. She identified that to me just after we put it in, that there was insufficient funds, and requested that we not deposit the check. I told her I didn't know where it was in the process, but I'd do my best to stop it. She told me that she would then either drive to me or mail a cashier's check for the required amount. That check never arrived. Approximately 3 weeks after the public hearing, she called me and said that please stop directing people to her as the contact. She's no longer associated with Billy Lovelace Hauling. So the individual that spoke before you is no longer trying to manage Billy Lovelace Hauling. And we have also yet to receive any of the payments, the monthly payments for the amount that's in arrears. So I believe my instructions were if there were 2 late payments, and we have thus to receive the quarterly payment or any of the 3 monthly payments to try to pay back the amount. Plus, I again lost contact with the solid waste hauler. So when I get complaints from citizens about their garbage not having been picked up in 3 weeks, I don't have anywhere to direct that to again with the loss of the one area of contact I have.
Have you spoken with Mr. Lovelace himself, or
No.
has he commented or
No email
contacted? Or
responses, and he's not answering telephone calls.
are you, from a staff perspective, comfortable that I know with our direction that we certainly want to work with any local business and do everything we can to accommodate him? Do you feel comfortable that staff and the city has lived up to that?
I think we've definitely done that. We've tried our best, I believe, to be as cooperative with the local business as possible, to the point now where I actually have citizens calling me and complaining that they paid him in advance for service and then have not received service for 3 weeks and asking me what to do. So the longer he remains on the list, the longer he can continue to collect fees and then not provide the service, and that leaves our citizens in a position of going to small claims court for a very small amount because it represents a breach of contract, which kind of is creating an untenable situation from my perspective for our community at this point.
Is there any questions from council?
I have
Karen?
one question. Will we
Yes.
still go against him for the back, because he owes us for collections for the past 2 years, correct?
Yes. I don't remember the exact amount. It's in here somewhere.
It's several
It was
thousand
announced.
Yeah,
dollars.
it's a couple $1,000.
It's the old blood in the turnip.
I would I would have to defer to our city attorney or our city manager on that one.
Whether or not it's worth even trying to collect it from him.
Okay. Alan?
Thank you, Mayor. What is the association of item number 11, the approval of GW Lovelace Hauling? What is the association between that?
GW Lovelace is a separate hauling company. They actually, I have a file here where they provided me with all the basic requirements for your ordinance, and they are trying to come in compliance. It's actually, I believe it's his brother. And they tried repeatedly, as they've been trying to come into compliance with the ordinance, strenuously repeating to me that they are not associated with the ordinance.
Yeah. I think there's some blood relation, but no business relation there.
At this point, I feel fairly confident that it's 2 separate entities, and given the language of the ordinance, there's really nothing for us to do but to trust that they're being upfront with us and that they are a separate entity, and
That's what I understand too. That's
move forward
been the
from
case.
there.
Bill?
Matt, how are we going to pass the word on this?
Right.
Well, it will come down off of the website. I have a list of the current approved providers along with the telephone numbers on the website. From what I understand, he's kind of losing a lot of his business just by attrition at this point anyway. I've actually been out to one, I believe she was 90 years old, city resident's house that hadn't had her garbage picked up, and took her telephone numbers and told her who to call or how to call through the list and explained the process to her. So I get calls on a regular basis asking about how to find other providers, at which I'm completely reticent to provide any specific suggestions, but I explain the process and how the ordinance works. And then I also get calls from some of the companies that are interested in, they've seen this agenda item and they're interested if they can poach in his territory. And they don't want to do that until they know for sure that he's not allowed to operate anymore. So I have a feeling that the other carriers are intending to pick up the slack if you guys vote in favor of revocation.
So do you think this thing is going to correct itself by natural attrition then? With people out there without...
I'm sorry?
You think this is going to correct itself by natural attrition then? Not everybody's internet...
Well, the only... no, I do not believe so, because as long as that name remains on the website, then there's a possibility that new customers will call up.
I think the question was for if the name's removed from there, then obviously that will eliminate new customers. And what you're saying is a lot of the older customers through attrition will quit using this service and go to another.
I'm not necessarily making that argument. I'm saying to this point, it seems like attrition is taking its toll on his business model. I would also get with Jason and try to come up with a way to make sure we let the public know.
Can we let the people know what the new people are, and by the way,
and direct them back to the website. We'll get that changed as soon as possible. We can get that changed. The other two added back tomorrow, and make these changes fairly quickly. And I'll do a public relations campaign so everybody knows.
I'd just like to ask Ken, I would think we would need to be careful that we put the facts out there, and maybe publish the approved list of haulers, but not be on a slanderous campaign. I would think we'd need to be careful with just putting the facts out there, not really stressing that this carrier has been removed from the list, but here's the carriers you're supposed to use. Would that make sense?
Yeah, I think that'd be appropriate. I mean, just to take the name off the list and let the citizens understand and conclude for themselves what's occurred. But the list is the key. The approved list is what we provide, and that's what we'll do.
Okay. Alan, you have?
And I would assume if there are reports that that this particular hauler is still operating in the city, then they could be cited and be hauled into municipal court.
It sounds to me like it's just going to take a little bit of time through 3 different avenues to work itself out. Julie?
Yes, Mayor, I was just going to ask, I know at one point it was difficult for this provider to provide a list of customers, and I was just going to suggest as part of that public relations, if at some point you were provided with any list, maybe that could be part of that proactive communication. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Do I have
I'd like to make a motion, Mayor.
All right.
I'd like to make a motion to approve for the removal of Billy Lovelace Hauling from the list of approved solid waste haulers for the City of Milton due to noncompliance with the ordinance, and that's item number 101140.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Hewitt and a second by Councilmember Tartt. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I just want to note for the record that there was a hearing with respect to this matter, and a representative from this agency came and spoke to the council. The council, I think, showed grace at that hearing and basically indicated to this company that they were going to get what I would call a provisional or probationary period. And the reason we're not having another full-born hearing this evening is because you've already done that. And so you have, I think, every right and have been over backwards to try and show, I think, a lot of grace and forbearance with respect to this entity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay, moving on to new business. The city clerk, please sound the next item.
A resolution to adopt the North Fulton Comprehensive Transportation Plan, agenda item number 101270. Mr. Carter Lucas.
Thank you. Mayor and Council, we're here tonight to bring forward the final North Fulton Transportation Plan. While we don't have a formal presentation for you tonight, we are here to answer questions. We've had a number of work sessions and meetings over the past year, public input over the past year to finally bring to conclusion the study that was an effort on all of the cities of North Fulton with facilitation from ARC. Kimley Horn has put together this North Fulton Transportation Plan, which really recognizes the fact that the transportation issues are not each individual jurisdiction's to try and solve, but really represent a regional issue. that we all need to work together to come to resolution on. This plan has been reviewed by staff. We found it to be in compliance with our own transportation plan that was passed last year, and we're recommending tonight that you approve the plan. If you have any questions, I'm here. Christina Pastor, that you're familiar with from Kimley Horn, is here, as well as Regan Hammond from ARC. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this point.
Okay. We'll open up to questions for staff. Staff of Kimberly Horn.
Were there any changes to this from our last presentation at all?
This plan is consistent with what you've seen so far.
Julie?
My next question would just be a function of that implementation strategy, and from the funding perspective, I know that one of the things we talked about was it's one thing to have the plan and obviously all of that collaboration between the jurisdictions within the region, but and I don't know if, Carter, if you want to speak to this now or maybe just at some future point, if we can get an update, excuse me, in terms of how we anticipate proceeding with those various sources of possible funding. I know that there's a plan in place, and just wondered when we might have that update so that as we anticipate questions from citizens.
I can speak to that. I'm Regan Hammond with the Atlanta Regional Commission.
Do you mind stepping up just to the microphone so we can have it all on the record?
My name is Regan Hammond with the Atlanta Regional Commission, and I manage this study for ARC. We have actually already started the process of looking for funding for these projects. We are underway with the development of the regional transportation plan called Plan 2040, and the projects that were included in the draft Tier 1 list are already going through the evaluation through the regional transportation planning process. So those projects that score well through that are likely to receive funding.
And I knew that had started, so I guess the better question from my perspective would be then, when do you anticipate that process of evaluation will come to conclusion so we have a sense of which of those projects get some funding?
We will have a draft regional transportation plan list by the end of this year. Then that will go through public comment and additional vetting through our committees and board at ARC. And then it goes to our board for approval July of 2011.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Is there any other questions?
I have just a quick statement. I just wanted to thank everybody because this has been a very exhaustive process from the community, citizens across all the jurisdictions, to the staff at Kimley Horn, to the ARC, to everybody within the city of Milton and beyond. And one of the statements that I think is just very telling about the work that's gone into this, and it's just under the vision, and it just says that this plan is developed cooperatively with respect for the preservation of individual jurisdictions' community character. And I think that that's been kind of the foundation of this whole process, and I think that that's really been key. And I just want to thank you for not only having that as a vision, but also allowing that to lead a lot of the community-centric meetings, because I think that indeed that has been the case, and just applaud that effort, because I don't know that historically that's always been the case, but it's been very evident through this process, and I just applaud the acknowledgement from ARC how important that is. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, if I don't have any other questions, do I have a motion and a second?
Mayor, I'll put forward a motion. I would put forward a motion to approve agenda item number 10-1270, which is the resolution to adopt the North Fulton Comprehensive Transportation Plan.
I'll second it.
Okay, I got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay, City Clerk, please say on the next item.
Next item is approval of agreement for sale of real property between the City of Milton, Georgia and Wooden Cross Investments, LLC, for property located at 13690 Highway 9, Milton, Georgia, 30004. This is agenda item number 10-1271. Mr. Ken Gerard.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the last agenda item this evening is an agreement for sale of realty between the City of Milton and the seller, Wooden Cross Investments, LLC. This is a piece of property located at 13690 Highway 9 in the City of Milton, totaling 4.89 acres for a total purchase price of $1,396,000 or $285,480 per acre. This will be a standard transaction of property where good and marketable title will be conveyed. The City of Milton, following the execution of this agreement, will have a 90-day due diligence period during which the City of Milton may get out of this contract based upon what we find during due diligence for convenience. There will be a payment of earnest money of 5% of the purchase price, or $68,900. During the due diligence period, the 90-day due diligence period, if we get out of the agreement for convenience, the $68,900 does in fact return to the City of Milton. Following the 90-day due diligence period and prior to closing, which is about 30 days roughly, if we get out for convenience, we still may, but the $68,900 in earnest money will go, in fact, to the seller. Otherwise, this is a standard contract for acquisition. We will be doing rigorous due diligence during this period to make sure that we're getting the best possible piece of property for the city. The contract specifically stipulates that we can hold a public hearing, so our citizens, if they want, can come and hear about this acquisition and see a plat and sort of get all of the nitty-gritty about the acquisition. And otherwise, we anticipate, barring something unforeseen occurring, that we will have a closing roughly 120 days from this evening. Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Is there any questions or comments for Ken or staff on this? Okay.
I do have one quick question. You said we can get out during the due diligence period just if we wanted to?
Yes, ma'am.
For convenience, yeah.
Because that's not how I read this exactly, because it just says we can get out due to a title defect or other exception to title.
Paragraph 5 says that buyers shall have 90 days after the date of the agreement to inspect the property. It's on page 2, Councilman Furman.
Okay.
And during the inspection period, buyer may terminate this agreement either for any reason or no reason at all.
That next sentence there, is it instruct through, or is it?
It's not. It's a bad fax is what it looks like to me. Is that what it is?
I just wasn't sure what it said.
It's fair. It says, in the event the buyer terminates this agreement during the inspection period, which is the 90 days, buyer shall be entitled to a full refund of the deposited earnest money. Termination following the inspection period, which is that 30 days I was talking about, shall result in the earnest money being retained by the seller.
Okay.
It's a great question. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. Any other questions, or do I have a motion and a second? Bill?
Quick one. During this due diligence period, have we come up with any estimate of site investigation, phase 1 study, and costs associated with that due diligence?
I would estimate, Councilmember Lusk, obviously we hope that the environmental is left at the phase 1 and doesn't have to go higher, but that we may in fact do another survey and then our title work. I would say you're probably looking, if everything goes well, between maybe $10,000 and $15,000.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion and a second?
I'd like to make a motion, please, Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
for the approval of agreement for a sale of real property between the City of Milton, Georgia and Wooden Cross Investments, LLC, for property located at 13690 Highway 9, Milton, Georgia, 30004. Agenda item 10-1271.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Councilmember Hewitt and a second by Councilmember Tarr. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay, I'm going to move on to reports. Does any council members have anything they want to report on? Okay. I'm going to move on to staff reports, and I want to thank Ms. Tully for filling in for Chris while he's out learning and interacting and in the city manager capacity for our city. And I know he's sitting there enjoying himself, sitting in the hotel room watching us, which he is. I told him to get a life, but so anyways, thank you, Chris. And Lynn, turn it over to you.
If I may, Ms. Cindy Bonacci from our Parks and Recreation Department has asked to present a unpublished staff report, so if you'll indulge her a moment.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I wanted to just provide a couple of updates. One, we just had our mayor's run this past Saturday. We had a total of 14 sponsors this year, and we had 110 registered runners. We had really nice weather. It was a bit cool for my taste, but the runners seemed to really enjoy it. We do have some leftover shirts from the event that we will be selling along with our Milton Roundup shirts at the Roundup this coming weekend. And it's my understanding that the committee for the Mayor's Run will present the check to the city in the amount for all the donations that were collected at a future council meeting in November. Also, as I mentioned, we do have a little event going on this weekend called the Milton Roundup out at Birmingham United Methodist Church. It will be held from 12 to 6 p.m. We have a total of 65 vendors this year and a total of 21 sponsors. Just to summarize the event, we have 2 kids areas, 2 entertainment areas, pony rides, hay rides, helicopter rides, which will be for a small fee. We have a Milton Public Safety Fund softball tournament going on, as well as a raffle and a silent auction. And for the first 250 people who come to the Roundup with 2 canned goods for North Fulton Community Charities, they'll receive a free Milton Roundup t-shirt. So we encourage people to come out if they would like a t-shirt. I do have a sample of the t-shirts that will be available this weekend. This is a sample. We made a couple tweaks to make the sponsors' logos a little bigger on the back. Say thank you to them. But I think they turned out real nice. I've been wearing it around, advertising as much as possible. So I hope that everyone will come out for that event. Also want to provide an update to you on an agreement that we've been working on for several months now, an intergovernmental agreement with Fulton County Schools. We've held several meetings now. We began meeting back in June. Lots of calls, conference calls, emails. I've been told that we will have a draft of an agreement in 2 weeks for the initial 3 schools that were proposed in the IGA. There has been interest by 2 other schools in Milton that we did not approach initially, who would like to sit down and also explore opportunities for us to offer programs and the utilization of their facilities in the future. So we'll be meeting with them in the near future. Also, as a separate intergovernmental agreement, we're exploring the possibility of a park project on 2 acres between Crabapple Crossing Elementary and Northwestern Middle School. This project was proposed as part of the fiscal year 11 capital projects under Parks and Recreation. We initially met with the principal at Crabapple Crossing Elementary. Apparently this 2 acres has been something he's been working on for many years, wanting to develop it as extra play space for the schools. Several different attempts to have the project move forward ultimately fell through. So he did ask to meet with the city to see if there was a possibility in the city and Fulton County Schools working together on a project. We met with him back, I think, the end of July, right before school started, talked through his concerns, his goals with the property. From that, we used the needs assessment survey that we had to create a preliminary site plan, and Carter Lucas in our Public Works Department was a huge help in putting that on paper, what was in my mind. Since then, that preliminary site plan has been forwarded along to Fulton County Schools. It's been reviewed. It's been very well received. To my knowledge, everyone who's received it is very supportive of the project and ready to see it move forward. There's some preliminary meetings that are being held this week to discuss this project as well as some of the other IGA work that we've been doing. So I wanted to make sure you were aware of where we were with the project. And I believe Sudi may have provided you with a copy of the preliminary site plan for your review. So is there any questions about kind of where we are with the process? I hope to have an IGA in place for use of at least the 3 initial schools that we proposed starting January 1st. If there are other agreements with the other schools, they may come at a later date, maybe beginning this summer.
Okay. Do you have any questions, Julie?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, Cindy, thank you so much for your effort. This is going to be, at the end of the day, it's going to be a great benefit for all the schools and the citizens. Just one thing, I know that Chris and I have been in touch, and I know with him being out of town, I don't know how much of that communication's made it back to you, but there had been some discussion, and I know initially that this park or this space was initially kind of viewed as that for Crabapple Elementary, but obviously both Milton High School as well as Northwestern Middle School view that as an opportunity to have green space and area for their students as well. And I know that because it may have been initially kind of initiated by Mr. Freiberger, that some of the other principals may have been a little bit later to some of those communications. So I just wanted to make sure that that communication is not solely with just the one, but that we're proactive. And I know there's been some emails, but if some of those preliminary meetings this week will hopefully outreach and include a physical meeting with some of those other principals, I think that would be tremendous. And maybe you've already got that scheduled.
It's my understanding that once we pass the site plan along to Fulton County Schools,
Right.
Fulton County Schools sat down with the principals and reviewed the document with them.
I think there's been some email communications. I just think it might be really helpful if we as a city also reach out proactively and even just maybe have a face-to-face meeting with those principals as well. So just a suggestion, especially because this parcel is immediately adjacent to Northwestern. And as an example, there's some existing parking that is, and this shows it, where it shows the connection to the middle school, but some of that overflow parking, it might be important to have some proactive dialogue with that on-site principal, simply because the access to and from that is immediately adjacent to this.
Sure.
And so I think there's probably just some good idea exchange that might occur if you guys have some direct contact.
Sure.
So that, I think, would be helpful.
And we do have some meetings. They're not scheduled yet. But
Right.
We're looking, because of my schedule over the next couple of weeks, we're looking out into the 2nd or 3rd week in November.
Which I think would be great. I know that Mr. Frazier would be very receptive to that, and I think would
And we've
hope
been
to have.
communicating via email.
Terrific. So as long as before this gets finalized, and I think in part, there's also additional land at the Northwestern site that includes a rope course and some other space that perhaps right now is underutilized that would allow for some extension and some connectivity. And the same is true with Principal Jones. So just thank you for that. Hopefully this is kind of an evolving process that will continue to evolve.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Cindy. So I'm excited that since you've been here, we're moving forward, Parks and Rec. Okay, that concludes our meeting. If there's no other staff reports, do I have a motion that we adjourn?
I move we adjourn the meeting.
I'll second the motion.
Motion by Councilmember Hewitt, second by Councilmember Bailey. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.